Assalamu alaikum girls. This is Rabia Batul from English Department of Rawalpindi Women University. Today we have to start the next lesson, that is Sir Alexander Flemming. Right? It is written by Patrick Pringle. The lesson is very important because it brings to light the life and achievements of Sir Alexander Fleming. It is about his life and great scientific discoveries. Fleming produced very useful antiseptics and brought about a revolution in the world of medicine. Pringle writes like this: Pasteur discovered germs and Lister killed them. These two men together revolutionized the theory and practice of medicine. Louis Pasteur, a French chemist, discovered that disease was caused by living organisms, so small that they could not be seen with the naked eye. Microorganisms or microbes or bacteria or germs. The words all mean the same thing. Joseph Lister, an English surgeon, later called Lord Lister, the first medical peer, applied Pasteur's discovery to surgery. Since germs are alive, so germs can be killed. They can be destroyed by heat or poisoned by certain chemicals, which are called antiseptics. Carbolic acid is the one, and that was the germ killer Lister used. Previously, surgeons had, without knowing it, infected their patients on the operating tables with germs, chiefly from their surgical instruments. Lister sterilized his instruments with carbolic acid and used carbolic acid to kill the germs on his hands, on the patient's skin, and even in the air in the operating theater. Then he could cut his patients open without fear of infecting them with the germs of disease. So this is the background which Patrick Pringle has set before telling us something about the discovery of Sir Alexander Fleming, who discovered world's greatest weapon against disease, that is called penicillin. Here in these paragraphs, what we have learned that Louis Pasteur and Lister both revolutionized the theory and practice of medicine. Pasteur discovered that germs or microorganisms or bacteria which cause disease. Lister sterilized means made free of germs his instruments with carbolic acid, which was his antiseptic method. And here are few pictures. First one is of Louis Pasteur, then Lord Lister, and then Fleming. And here you can see a picture in which the surgeons, they are operating a patient by using carbolic acid and to make the surgery free of germs. Okay. Lister's aim was the prevention of disease. The object of his antiseptic method, as it was called, was to stop germs from getting into the body. So this was the major problem. The cure of disease was more difficult problem, for here the germs were already inside the body. Certainly they could be killed by the same antiseptic method, but it was soon found that a chemical that destroyed germs also destroyed the cells of the body. Injecting carbolic acid into the blood was tried and quickly abandoned, means stopped, for it did more harm than good. To kill all the germs, the dose would have had to be strong enough to kill the patient too. So it became a crucial problem in the field of medical science. Here you can see few pictures. We can see that there are good bacteria as well as bad bacteria in human body, and the carbolic acid were doing more harm than the good to the body. It was a bacteriologist named Mechnikov, a pupil of Pasteur. He was a student of Pasteur who revealed, who showed the true nature of the problem. He discovered the body's natural armor. Armor means the defensive system against disease. He discovered the body's natural armor against disease, the leukocytes or the white cells of body. So it was Metchnikoff, who discovered the white cells of body or the natural defensive system of the body, and he named these cells leukocytes. He showed that when the germs enter the body, they are immediately attacked by the host of white cells from the whole neighborhood, which rush to join battle with the invader like soldier answering a bugle call. So in this way, the natural defensive system of the body works. He showed that disease was, in fact, a fight between the leukocytes and the germs, and a fight to the death, for it ended only with the death of the germs or the death of the patient. If the white cells win, the patient would live, and if the germs win, the patient would die. So carbolic acid and all other known antiseptics did more damage to the leukocytes than to the germs. The problem was to find something that would attack only the germs and to help not destroy the fighting leukocytes. Here are a few pictures which I have selected to show. First one is of Mechnikov, who was a Russian imperial zoologist, and it was his achievement that he first of all pioneered a research in immunology. And here is the second picture of leukocytes, which are colorless cells which circulate in the blood and body fluids, and they defend or they counteract foreign substances and disease, and they are also called the white cells or the white blood cells. The problems were still unsolved in 1906 when Alexander Flemming passed the finals of his medical examination and joined the staff of the inoculation department of St. Mary's Hospital, Paddington. Alexander Flemming was born on a farm near Dowell in Ayrshire on August 6, 1881. He was the youngest of the family of 8. His father died when he was 7 years old, and his eldest brother, Hugh, took over the management of the farm. Alexander was then still going to the village school. At 10, he went to Dowell School and stayed till he was 12. That was the age limit. The question was then discussed whether he should continue his education or go back to the land. It was decided to keep him at school, and he went to Kilmarnock Academy. At 14, he went to London, and for the next 2 years, he studied at Regent Street Polytechnic. Here are the few pictures which may show you about the life of Sir Alexander Fleming. These are the places. First picture is of St. Mary's Hospital, then Darwell, which is his birthplace, and you can see in the picture it is written East Ayrshire, Dowell, birthplace of Sir Alexander Fleming. Then here is the family picture in which all family members are shown, and the last picture is of his school, Polytechnic School. Okay, we are reading the biography of the great scientist or bacteriologist. The writer further says 3 of his brothers were already in London where he arrived. One of them, Thomas, had studied medicine at Glasgow University and was a qualified oculist. 2 brothers became opticians, and back in Scotland, one of his sisters married a Dowell doctor and another a veterinary surgeon. The Flemings, born on the land, were becoming a medical family, right? But when Alexander left the Polytechnic at 16, he was to take a job as a clerk in the shipping firm in Leadenhall Street. There was not enough money for him to study for a profession or trade. Fleming worked in Leadenhall Street for 4 years. Then, at 20, he received a share in legacy, in property. It was not large, but enough for him to train for a career with better prospects. His brother Thomas was then in Harley Street, and according to Fleming himself, my brother Thomas pushed me into medicine. So just like his family and all family members who were becoming a medical family, Fleming was also pushed into this field by his elder brother Thomas. There were 12 medical schools in London, and Fleming knew nothing about any of them. He chose St. Mary's for no better reason than that he had played water polo against the hospital team. Again, you can see a few pictures. University of Glasgow, where his brother Thomas had been studying, and he became an oculist. Picture of an oculist I have also selected to make you understand the word. And then next picture is of Leadenhall Street, where Fleming had been working as a clerk in a shipping firm, and last is of Harley Street. Okay, for 8 years, Fleming worked in Wright's laboratory. For 8 years, he sought to find a means to aid the leukocytes in their fight against invading bacteria. So it was the major problem of the medical field of that time, that all the bacteriologists, like Fleming, they were trying to find some solution or some aid for the leukocytes, which are the white cells of the body, to fight their battle against the invading bacteria, I mean attacking bacteria. Then in 1914, he joined RAMC and came face to face with one of the main medical problems of the First World War, the treatment of infected wounds. RAMC means Royal Army Medical Corps, and here you can see the logo of that medical college, right, or medical Royal Army Medical Corps. And the second picture is of the patients which were injured or which were having infected wounds during the World War. By 1914, Lister's antiseptic method of surgery had been largely replaced by what was called the aseptic method. Right now, you people have to understand the difference between antiseptic and aseptic method. Instead of chemicals, heat was used to sterilize instrument. Antiseptic method was based on the use of chemicals, while aseptic method was based on killing germs with the help of heat. So instead of chemicals, heat was used to sterilize instruments, clothing, and other operating theater equipment. Equipment mean instruments. The purpose was the same, to prevent germs from getting into the wound, right? In peacetime, this was adequate, this was sufficient for most surgical cases, but in the treatment of war wounds, prevention was not enough. Now the problem was different because of the World War. The wounds were already infected and the germs were already present inside the wounds. So this method would not work. In nearly every case, the wound was infected before treatment could be begun. Thus, the surgeon's problem was the same as that of the physician treating disease. He had to try to kill the germs without damaging the leukocytes that were already fighting against the disease. Here you can see a picture of aseptic method, that is heating up the instruments to kill the germs. And again, you can see the picture of a ward of a hospital which was set up during the World War. There was no solution and the problem was tremendous. Tremendous means great, huge. For the first time in warfare, high explosives were used extensively. High explosives were used greatly, and wounds that were not infected were rare indeed. Every patient had infected wounds. The surgeons were unprepared. Thanks to the antiseptic and aseptic methods, infection in surgical cases had become the exception instead of the rule. Now it was the other way about again. We have in this war gone back to all the septic infections of the Middle Ages. And the Middle Ages is also called the Dark Ages, and it ranges from 10th century to 14th century, roughly you can say, said the Director General of the Army Medical Service. So this was the statement of Director General of Army Medical Service, who said that we have in this war gone back to all the septic infections of the Middle Ages. The war wounds were as complex and as difficult to treat as it had been in the case of septic infections of Middle Ages. So medical officers treated infected wounds by the only method they knew, with chemical antiseptics. They applied carbolic acid, iodine, and other chemicals to open wounds in an attempt to destroy as many germs as possible. They could not destroy all the germs, but thought that if only some were killed, it would be better than none. So here are a few pictures. The first one is of the Director General, and second one is of the infections of the Middle Ages, reflecting the infections, uncontrollable infections of the Middle Ages. And here are the medicines which the surgeons of the era they were using um, for the treatment of wound. Meanwhile, Fleming, a medical officer himself, was still working with his old chief, Sir Ambrose Wright. He had been made a colonel in Army Medical Service and had set up a research laboratory at Boulogne. Then, with the help of Fleming, he set to work to tackle the problem of wound infection. Wright and Fleming discovered that the treatment being used was doing more harm than good. Each of the chemical antiseptic was more harmful to the leukocytes than to the germs. And in some cases, the antiseptic actually helped the germs to grow and multiply. So the things were quite serious. And the situation was totally critical. And Wright and Fleming both insisted that the method was basically wrong, that the surgeon's aim should be not so much to kill the germs with an outside agent as to help the leukocytes do their natural germ killing work. So both of them they proved that the surgeons they should worry more about helping the leukocytes than think about how to kill the germs. So here you can see the picture of Wright's laboratory, and both Wright and Fleming they seem busy in their research to tackle the current problem of that age. Experiments were made with different chemicals, and one after another became fashionable and then gave way to the next. Then they were rejected, and the next chemicals they took their place. And at the end of the war, which had killed about 7 million men, the problem was still unsolved. So here we can understand, or we can uh, imagine the gravity of the situation, that how much serious was the situation in the field of medical science. Fleming, now 37, went back to St. Mary's and continued research. And in 1922, he discovered an antiseptic, not a chemical like carbolic acid, but a natural antiseptic manufactured by the body. He made the discovery by what he modestly called an accident. Right? He was suffering from catarrh and began to examine his own nasal secretions. And in these secretions, he discovered a substance that destroyed microbes on the culture plate, means germs on the culture plate. Culture plate is a scientific term used for the small place in the laboratory where germs are kept and they are developed. He called it lysozyme. So lysozyme was the first natural antibiotic or antiseptic that was, or the germ killer substance which was discovered by Fleming. Here you can see different pictures, and you can see that how Fleming is examining the germ killing natural substance who killed the microbes. The discovery of lysozyme did not bring Fleming popular fame, but it raised his position in the world of science. The medical profession began to pay more attention to what he said, and at this time he had quite a lot to say on the subject, and that had occupied his mind ever since the First World War. Chemical antiseptics were fashionable again, and Fleming once more reminded doctors of greater importance of the natural defenses of the body. This was his belief that there must be some natural armor against disease or natural weapon um, the against the fight against disease, and he went on proclaiming that. Okay, this picture shows the human immune system on which Fleming kept insisting. In 1928, Fleming was appointed Professor of Bacteriology in the University of London, and in the same year he hit on penicillin. Hit on me, he because accidentally he discovered it, and but it was the first level. The phrase in his own, the very first stage in the discovery, he says, was due to a stroke of good fortune, but only the first stage. In his laboratory at St. Mary's, he was carrying out a series of experiments on the common germ called Staphylococcus. He was growing colonies of germs on plates spread with agar. Right? The plates were kept covered. The plates were kept covered, but to examine them under a microscope, he had to take the covers off. As soon as you open a culture plate, he said afterwards, you are asking for trouble. Things drop from the air. One of those bits of trouble happened to be penicillin. A mold spore coming from I don't know where dropped on the plate. So this was the first stage of his discovery, which was just as in his own words, a stroke of good fortune. He was growing the colonies of germs, and one day when he opened open his culture plates to examine those germs, he found that a mold spore, a piece of fungus, it dropped over the plate and it killed the germs all around it. So here are few pictures. First of all, University of London, where he was doing his experiments, and the second picture is of culture plates, where in which he was growing the colonies of germs, and then a clear picture of the mold spore. Presumably, the spore of the mold or fungus was blown in through the window. It may have come from the larder of a forgetful Paddington housewife. For this particular mold commonly breeds on damp bread, cheese, and preserves. This all of you already know that how does fungus or mold grows on on all these edibles. It grows best when the conditions are cool and damp, and the summer of 1928 was very cool and damp. Having settled on the culture plate, the mold began to grow, and almost at once the microbes around it began to disappear. So this was going to be proved the natural antiseptic. Fleming put aside the work he was doing and began to investigate. He made a pure culture of mold and tried its effects on other bacteria. Some grew right up to it, others, like the staphylococci, stopped short, inhibited by its antibacterial action. So his experiment stood successful. Here you can see the pictures of mold or fungus, and in the last picture you can see Fleming busy in his research. The next step was to produce the antibacterial substance free of mold. Definitely, mold cannot be injected or mold cannot be the medicine. It had to be concentrated and had to be transformed in the form of some medicine. Fleming did this by plating the mold on a meat broth. It grew on the surface as a felt-like mass, thick mass, and turned the broth yellow. The broth's color was changed into yellow. After a week's growth, the fluid was strained through a fine filter and tested for antibacterial properties. The results were as favorable as before, and Fleming knew that he had discovered another natural antiseptic with far greater possibilities than lysozyme. He called it penicillin. Further experiments showed that in its effects on germs like staphylococci, penicillin was about 3 times as strong as carbolic acid, right? And all other chemical antiseptics, it had no toxic effects at all on leukocytes. So now things seem to be rushing towards the right direction, because this was the major area of research on which all the bacteriologists of the 19th century, they were focusing that that something should be discovered which should be beneficial for the leukocytes, and they should not have any toxic effect on them. Theoretically, it looked like an ideal germ killer, the antiseptic that had been sought ever since Pasteur discovered germs. In practice, there was one big obstacle. In its crude form, penicillin was unstable. So this was the major problem. The next problem, and it could not be used in the treatment of disease until a means was found of concentrating it. Concentrating is the procedure in which some raw material can be changed into a proper type of medicine. So here you can see different pictures showing the process of filtering meat broth and Fleming's experiment on the meat broth. And after filtering, it turned out that Fleming has discovered penicillin, and a proper medicine had been discovered to kill germs. That was a chemist's job. Mean concentration was the chemist's job, and Fleming was a bacteriologist. He tried to concentrate the drug but failed. He lacked both training and the equipment needed for the job. Equipment mean instruments. He published his findings, mean his research. He published his research and continued to proclaim his faith in penicillin. And he kept his original culture of mold. It can be seen today, dried up but still recognizable in the place of honor in the Museum of Medical School of St. Mary's Hospital. So it seemed that penicillin was like lysozyme, just another laboratory success, and regretfully Fleming turned to other things. So on finding no way of concentrating penicillin and transforming it into a proper drug, Fleming turned towards other things, mean he started research on some other things or other areas. Meanwhile, a fresh attempt had been begun to solve the problem of concentrating penicillin. It was made at Oxford by a team headed by Professor Howard Florey and Dr. E.B. Chain. Here are the pictures. First one is of a culture plate which carries the mold spore, right? And then St. Mary's Hospital. And then you can see here two people, Sir Howard Florey and E.V. Chain. They are found busy in the research. And the third picture is of Alexander Flemming, Howard Florey, and E.V. Chain. The Oxford team included trained chemists as well as bacteriologists and had all the equipment that Fleming had lacked. Yet it was a long, hard struggle before they succeeded in producing a practical concentration of penicillin. The first human cases were treated in 1941, and the problem then became a matter of production. One of the Oxford team went to America where new methods of manufacture were discovered, and in 1943 penicillin reached the 8th Army in Egypt. In the words of the Viscount Montgomery of Alamein, the healing of war wounds was revolutionized. Penicillin arrived just in time to save countless lives. It was easily the strongest weapon yet forged in the fight against disease. So these were the words of Viscount Montgomery of Alamein of Egyptian Army in 1943, who appreciated the discovery of penicillin and who considered it the strongest weapon against fight of disease. While penicillin was being hailed as a wonder drug, the name of its discoverer was hardly known outside the medical profession. I mean, it was not publicly known up till now. Then Sir Amroth Wright wrote a letter to the Times, the famous newspaper, telling the world who had made the discovery, and Fleming became famous. First picture is of the University of Oxford, then the inside of the laboratory in Oxford University, where all the research had been carried out by E.V. Chain and Howard Florey and Alexander Fleming. And the third picture is of the Viscount, Director General Viscount Montgomery, and the last one is of the picture in which the article about Fleming discovery was published by Dr. Florey. He was knighted in 1944 and awarded the Nobel Prize of Medicine in 1945. Government and universities all over the world showered him with honors. He had to travel widely, attend functions, make speeches, receive thanks. Often personal expressions of gratitude from people who owed their lives to his discovery. In Italy once, at a medical gathering, an unknown man in short sleeves pushed himself and his three children forward to reach Fleming. If these children are alive, he said, they owe it to you. Then, pointing to Fleming, he told his children, never forget to ask God in your prayers to bless this man. So these were the achievements of this great scientist or bacteriologist, and he was knighted in 1944. Mean he was given the title of Sir by the government, and he got Nobel Prize. Apart from this, he had to go to different places and to address people to tell about his discovery. And one incident is mentioned by Patrick Pringle, which shows great gratitude of people to him. Here he is being awarded different prizes, Nobel Prize, and other appreciations or other rewards he got um, as a result of his discovery. But Fleming protested that such gratitude was not due to him. Everywhere I go, people thank me for saving their lives, he said. I don't know why they do it. I didn't do anything. Nature makes penicillin, I just found it. So this is the famous phrase or famous sentence by him, that nature makes penicillin, I just found it. It shows his extreme modesty. He was greatly modest to accept even this discovery as his own credit. It was not just modesty that made him say this, it was a restatement of his belief in the healing power of nature. He protested vigorously against the idea that penicillin was a man made invention. He says, I have been accused of inventing penicillin, but no man could have done that. Nature, in the form of lowly vegetable, has been making it for thousands of years. I only discovered it. Again, these are very remarkable words said by him, and always he insisted that he discovered it by chance. Here you can see him speaking to a public and saying all that which we have just read. Happy is who already belongs to history in his own lifetime, said Lord Mohun, referring to Fleming. But Fleming was not happy in the limelight, in this fame. He said, I'm a simple bacteriologist. He said as soon as he could slip away, he went back to his laboratory at St. Mary's and got back to work. The Americans visited the laboratory and were amazed. One said it was like the back room of an old-fashioned drugstore. He found it hard to believe that penicillin could have been discovered there. Fleming laughed, and in Detroit, where he was shown over the last word in research laboratories, a gleaming, dustless, air-conditioned, sterilized sanctum, he shocked his host by saying, wonderful, but penicillin could never have been discovered in a lab like this. When they saw the point, they could not deny it. Their culture plates were never contaminated, for the air was too pure. There was no way in for spores of a common mold. Okay, here you can see people visiting his laboratory and expressing their views. And the first picture is of Lord Moran, who praised him. And then you can see the last picture, which is about the area where Fleming used to live. Fleming's achievement was not only the discovery of penicillin, as the Surgeon General of the United States Forces said. Fleming, like Pasteur, has opened up a whole new world of science. He found the antibiotic that is growth inhibiting treatment of disease. Growth inhibiting means growth stopping treatment of disease. He provoked others to seek new antibiotics and all research workers to be on the lookout for them, particularly in molds and fungi. And out of these researches, which but for Fleming would not have been started, came new drugs made by nature and at last discovered by man, of which the best known at present is strepto, uh, streptomycin. Streptomycin. Fleming himself regarded this as the most important result of his work. Even before penicillin was in general use, he said, the greatest benefit penicillin has conferred is not to be to the drug itself, but the fact that its discovery has stimulated new research to find something better. So penicillin was the forerunner of many other discoveries, many other um, inventions in the field of medical surgery and medical in the field of medical surgery and medicine. Sir Alexander Fleming died in 1955 at the age of 73. His work still his work will never die. Here you can see some pictures and uh, the stone the on his grave, and you can see the words engraved on that stone. Now I want you people to watch a video which will summarize the whole lecture, and it will make the whole idea very clear to you, and you will be able to understand how penicillin was discovered and how people contributed to it, especially those who helped Sir Alexander Fleming in his research and in concentrating the um, concentrating the drug.
Poverty, hunger, and disease. These three ancient enemies of man still stalk hand in hand across much of the world. Of the three, disease can be said to be the most deadly. Disease often fathers hunger and poverty. This is the story of how one of the mightiest weapons against disease was forged. It is the story of penicillin, the first of the modern wonder drugs known as antibiotics. Today, the penicillins are only one group of antibiotics among many, and in laboratories throughout the world, the search goes on for more. To learn how the first of them, penicillin, was discovered and developed, one must know of the work of 3 British scientists. What they achieved has revolutionized medicine. Sir Alexander Flemming, for the initial discovery of penicillin, Dr. E.B. Chain, and Sir Howard Florey, for their finding its curative power to benefit millions. Early in the 1920s, in London, Alexander Flemming, a young bacteriologist, worked in the inoculation department of St. Mary's Hospital. Familiar with antiseptics and inoculation as weapons to help the human body battle against disease germs, he began to wonder what natural defenses might be possessed by exposed parts of the body, such as the eyes. In each place, Flemming found a protective substance which could destroy some germs before they invaded the body. Some germs, but not all, and not the most deadly. In one of the glass dishes where he cultured germs for his experiments, Flemming noticed one day in 1928 that some mold, such as appears on decaying food, had begun to grow. A spoiled experiment. But with mind alerted by the earlier work on protective substances, he looked closer. He saw that near to the mold, no germs were growing. Might it be that this mold, like the human body, produced a substance capable of destroying germs? He made tests and found that even some of the most dangerous germs died near to the mold. He then grew the mold in a meat broth liquid. The color of the liquid changed finally to a bright yellow. This liquid proved lethal to germs, even when greatly diluted. Not pure enough to be injected into a human body, it was nevertheless effective on wounds. Flemming published what he had done, calling his substance penicillin. Attempts to purify it and to extract its essence failed. In the 1930s, a new chapter opened at the University of Oxford. The professor of pathology, Dr. Howard Florey, was joined by Dr. E.B. Chain. Together, they planned a research project on natural germ-killing substances. They unearthed the now old papers on penicillin. They formed a team. The great quest was on. First, Chain and his colleagues set to work on the chemical problems of extraction and purification. They found a way of transferring the active penicillin from liquid to liquid until it was held within almost pure water. They froze off the water, which left a brown powder. Here was a powerful form of penicillin, still crude, but which produced no ill effects in animals. Florey prepared the great test. The germ Streptococcus is a killer. This he injected into mice. Half of them then received the brown powder. Those who had been given the penicillin lived and were healthy. And Professor Florey declared, "It looks like a miracle." But attempts to make it pure enough for man caused it to lose its potency. Chain and a colleague, Dr. Abraham, then devised another method. Dissolving the crude penicillin in ether, they passed it through a long tube filled with aluminum, each substance producing layers of differing colors. In the yellow layer was penicillin. They repeated the process again and again. Now Florey could try penicillin on human beings. The results proved the healing power of penicillin. by now World War II was raging. The need for penicillin's healing power was enormous for soldiers and for civilians. But in 1941, purified penicillin was still desperately short, and Britain was hard pressed by air attacks. To make the quantities needed, it was decided to seek help in the United States. Here, scientists devised better ways of culturing penicillin, which could give much bigger yields. Production in quantity could now be foreseen. With encouragement from their government, American drug companies tackled the difficulties of producing penicillin on an industrial scale. Florey returned to Chain and the others, able to look forward to supplies for further research. Alexander Flemming had a patient dying of meningitis. Flemming turned to Florey, and Florey gave him all the penicillin that could be made available, and with it, his advice. Profoundly impressed by this personal experience of penicillin's dramatic power, Flemming addressed himself to the British government about the need for large-scale production. And the press took up the cause. The big British chemical and drug companies and the research workers now also protected the big-scale production of penicillin. The mold was grown in thousands of flasks. Britain's output joined the huge supplies now coming from the United States to give life to hundreds of thousands of soldiers. By the end of the war, flasks had been replaced by great steel vats, each making 15,000 gallons of penicillin liquid. And huge factories were in production both in Britain and the United States. Penicillin was now for the world. Everywhere curing the sick, everywhere saving lives. But some deadly germs had forms which resisted penicillin. This was a challenge which research had to meet. In the middle of the 1950s, a famous British drug company set up a special team to work in close collaboration with Professor Chain. And in 1959, a breakthrough. This is the core, the main building block of a molecule of penicillin. Alone, it possesses no germ-killing power. But add other groups of atoms to it, and you make a penicillin. Add one group of atoms to it, and you make the original penicillin. Add others, and you make an ever-growing family of new penicillins. Some of these can tackle the germs which originally resisted, and some can carry the attack to germs not formally sensitive to penicillin at all. And in the meantime, work has continued at Oxford, where yet another mold has produced yet another penicillin-like substance, Cephalosporin C. This too has a basic core, which in turn can be used to build a family of antibiotics to carry further the attack against germs which formerly have resisted. All these mighty weapons against disease stem in some way from the forging of the first one, penicillin. The great discovery, for which in 1945 the world rightly and gratefully honored Dr. E.B. Chain, Sir Howard Florey, and Sir Alexander Flemming, pioneers in a struggle which promises now to drive back that ancient enemy, disease.